to continue with our PFAS sampling. I have with me today Ms. Heidi Yelin, who's the manager of the environmental laboratory for the Commonwealth Utilities Corporation on Saipan. Back in 2013 to 2015, PFAS was detected on Saipan under the UCMR3 sampling. And since that time, Heidi and her staff have collected a lot of PFAS samples. So Heidi, do you have any tips for people who are collecting PFAS samples for the first time?
Yes, we have collected a lot of samples over the course of the past, going on 6 years now. I remember when you called us up and said, hey, we've got an issue with a phone call with EPA on the PFAS issue. And we didn't really have an idea of what the problem was or that there was a problem at all. We knew that there were detections, but we didn't have any idea of the ramifications of them. So what we did was we've gone to wellheads and entry points. And one of the things I think that's important to remember is to abide by the clean hands, dirty hands process that you've used with as samplers, making sure so that clean hands, dirty hands, you have one person who opens up the tap, fills out the chain of custody, but the other person, only thing that they do is they don't even adjust the sample tap to bring the sample volume down to the width of a pencil, but they just collect the sample, open the bottle cap. I'm demonstrating, open the bottle cap and fill. That's it. That's all that they do.
So that's one person does that while the other person
does that while the other one fills out the bottle and such. One of the things that I would just like to mention that the sampling protocols from Eurofins and also California board mention about the use of Sharpies, gel packs, etc. We've sent samples. We've collected a lot of samples, since 2016, we collected wellheads, at least 25, 30 samples, at one time. We did that the next year and the following year, twice a year. So we've done a lot of samplings. We've done entry points every quarter. And we have not had any detections in our field blanks of, any cross-contamination that might happen. We have had one instance where we had detection in a field blank, but I really suspect that happened with a sampler mix-up because, I can look at my bottle and it just says field blank from the lab. And if the sampler picks up, writes the wrong label number on the top, it's going to get messed up. So sampling tip, another tip, 1, I don't see cross-contamination. 2, the clean hands, dirty hands. 3, what I really recommend doing before you go out and sample is to identify your bottles on the top, because your bottles may come from the lab with a pre-printed label on there, and it may be correct, it may be incorrect. Many times our bottles are incorrectly labeled. So label them appropriately for yourself. For our usage, we would write, say, Isley Res. So, I write on the top because that's what you see when you're going to collect your sample bottles, or, they're in the cooler or your gel in your box, whatever you use. We haven't, we do abide by samplers do abide by the, prohibition of eating and drinking or smoking or chewing betel nut or any other personal hygiene products. We don't, they're not using deodorant, sunscreens, bug spray, Gore-Tex clothing and things like that. But I know that the wellheads and the appurtenances inside the wells are going to have Teflon tape.
Sure.
Which is supposed to be one of those don't use. that's not been an issue. The other tip it mentions is that using ballpoint pens, don't use Sharpies. We have pilot ultra fine pens that we use for these PFAS monitoring, and they say non-xylene. I think that these are okay to utilize, but we've been using them. And like I mentioned before, we're not having any problems with detections in our field blanks.
Okay, that's good to know.
And I think the final thing to remember is, which just came about recently, is sampling. How much sample do you get? You fill your bottle, right? It says to the neck, invert 5 times, to mix the meat dechlorination or the preservative. Well, here's a field blank bottle, and you can barely see where the level is, but I opened it up, which I'm not going to use this bottle, and it's filled to the neck here.
Okay.
And the lab that we're utilizing told us that the samples for PFAS, their methods, I believe it might be the state of California, but they're required to have at least 238 milliliters of sample. So that's, if you fill only to the shoulder, you may get 250 mils, but maybe you're just below it.
Okay.
So it's probably better for you to fill up to the neck of the bottle and then invert and cap it and invert it 5 times, like they mentioned before, on each of the sample bottles.
All right, great. Now, what about, you had told me something about logistics. That's a big,
that is a big
that's probably your number one concern, right?
Yeah. Before you even collect your samples, contact your laboratory to make sure that they've got the space to run your samples. Okay. The samples, once they arrive at the lab, they must be extracted, I think within 14 days. Mm-hmm. For us, where we're located in Saipan, it's taking us 6 days, 5 or 6 days, 5 days if I'm lucky, for transit time. So that's a short time, right? Then the lab gets the samples, they have to extract it pretty soon.
Right.
And so that's important. The other thing to make sure is that your lab, what is the acceptance criteria temperature? Our laboratory says that samples must be below, if they are not received within 48 hours, PFAS samples are not received within 48 hours, they must be less than 6 degrees. So for them to be compliant, it's not 10 degrees. So, sometimes
it depends on the lab then.
Yes, it would depend on, I would check your lab, because your labs around the United States are going to have different criteria based on whatever their lab certifying officer says, which varies from state to state.
Right. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Is there anything else? Any other tips, or is that about covers it?
I think that covers it mostly. I mean, really, it is important to check with how long it's going to take for your sample site once you collect the sample and to send it off. The other issue is that generally speaking, we collect our samples the day before, refrigerate them overnight, and then ship them the next afternoon.
Okay.
So that they're very cold. If you don't have that luxury, what you may want to do is to have an ice bath. So bring your samples to 4 degrees or so.
Oh, before you pack them in the mailing container, like get them cold to start with. Yeah. That's a really good tip. Okay.
You cannot assume that your samples are going to be, if you collect them at say 11 o'clock and you're going to ship them out at 3 o'clock, there's no guarantee that those samples are going to be cool enough before they get in the cooler, before you pack them up.
Right, then they'll just melt all the ice that's in there already.
Correct.
Right, so get them cold before you actually put them in your mailing container.
So
if you've got a long shipment time like you guys.
Yes, and we do, and COVID hasn't helped any. either. We've reduced the number of flights. But right now, we have a shipment schedule. We figured out with our shipper which days best to ship. And there's other details like making sure that your invoice is printed clearly and concise, and it matches exactly the TSCA, the Toxic Control Substance Act criteria that you need to have. So all of these things are really important, and they could cause delays for samplers in the States. It's not going to be the big issue that it is for us because we've 5 to 6 days transit time.
Right. Well, I can imagine people in Hawaii or in Alaska might have similar issues that we have.
Yes. So one, making sure that your samples are cool. If you don't know how to make an ice bath, you can go online and how to make an ice bath. Okay. But it's not hard, and it's important, I think, to make sure that your samples get cool before you pack them.
All right. Great. Well, Heidi, thank you very much, and we appreciate your time. I really appreciate taking time out of your day to give us some tips, and talk to you again soon.